Okay, I think we're live, so I'm going to get started. I'm Katrina Walker, and I'm an educator for PFAFF, and welcome to Innovation Hour. Don't you just love that name? I do, because we can do so many innovative things with our sewing machines and our sergers, and people just don't realize the half of it. So whenever we get asked to highlight something, it's always very exciting because we get to show you something that maybe you're curious about, you just haven't really got around to trying it, or what have you. So very excited to be with you today, and we're going to be exploring beading with your serger. And beading with your serger it's actually, it's funny, it brings back a lot of memories for me. So bear with me for just a moment, because so when I bought my very first serger of my own, this was way back in the back in the mid 90s, and that was my first brand new serger of my very own. And the first thing I bought for my serger, the first accessory, was actually a beading foot. Because at that time, being in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, and a lot of my friends were getting married and things. And so I actually really went a long way towards paying for my serger by doing bridal veils and things. And so some of the things that I really enjoy doing with a beading foot, in case you're wondering why would I want a beading foot? Well, hopefully I'll show you some samples that you might get you inspired. But one of the classes that I really have enjoyed teaching is one called Sergers Are Fascinating. So as you can see, so on my fascinator here, so I've used beads to actually embellish the edges of ribbon to help fill in my fascinator, make it very fancy. These are actually rosettes, but I was in a hurry, so they don't look very rosy, but technically they are. But it's just a lot of fun, and there's really no wrong way to make a fascinator. So, and you even use the beading foot to bead around the edges of the base, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. How to use the serger to put the edging on a fascinator base, which makes it a lot easier to then fill in the fascinator with all your trims and things. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. I'm going to go ahead and put my fancy fascinator on to get myself in the right mode. Make sure my feathers are all fluffed up. I'm looking at my screen here. Okay, so that should be get us in the right mood for our beading with our sergers. So I mean, I understand that you may be thinking again, why would I ever want to? I'm not really going to make bridal veils or fascinators. But here's the thing, is that you can do a lot of even home dec with it. You can do, this is a bustier design I've been playing with. So I'll stand up here. So just for the center of this little bustier, I don't think this is actually in my size. I think this is model sized. But anyhow, but using it to do some trim down the front panel and up around the edges of this little bustier. I'll show you how you can do that too. So there's basically two ways to apply beading to your projects. You can go ahead and, of course, put it along the edge of something. So that's the most common use for a beading foot, is to put beading along the edge of something. But we also have the ability, like with my little bustier design that I'm playing with, we also have the ability to fold the fabric and apply the beading as a embellishment, as a top stitching. And so, of course, you could apply beads to quilt blocks. You could apply them to table runners. I mean, any kind of thing. I mean, you have a great imagination. I'm sure you can think of all kinds of things. But sometimes the beading foot can be kind of intimidating to people, figuring out how to actually use it. So I wanted to really take the time to walk through with you how to recognize which feet are your beading feet, for one thing, but also understand the mechanics of how it uses. And I have two different sergers. And of course, if you're watching from outside the US, yes, they're overlockers is what you would call them. But I have two different sergers. We have two different styles of feet that fit our PFAFF sergers. So I'm going to show you two of the different styles that work on our Admire Air 5000, the Admire Air 6000, and the Admire Air 7000. And actually, I will tell you, the foot that works on the 6000 and 7000 will also work on your Coverlock 4.0 if you have one of those. So I still have one of those also. So I just wanted to point that out. So it's really great. I was super excited when I learned the engineers made it so that we could continue to use those feet, because I hate having to repurchase all my feet. So anyway, so let's look at what is a beading foot. So let's just go to our overhead here. So like I said, there's a couple different kinds that we use on our PFAFF Sergers. And the first one I'm going to show you actually is the one for the Admire Air 5000. So the Admire Air 5000 is a little different in that it has a front section and a back section. Okay, so I just want to point that out, that this is what the beading foot, you see this flange here, this is for the 5000. So if you have one of these, that's the machine it's for. This is more typical. So I'm going to put this on the close-up here. So this is a beading foot that looks more like pretty much every brand of beading foot. There, I had it backwards. Okay, so here's where it connects to your serger, hooks onto your serger. And there's generally going to be a front channel and a back channel. Okay, now the important thing with these feet, the critical thing is that when you buy your beads or pearls, whatever it is you're using with your beading foot, you have to make sure that it will flow freely through your foot. You have to make sure that it's going to flow freely through the foot. Now, I'm just doing this to show you what I mean by that. I will be doing this on the machines as well. But so this particular bead I'm showing you. This is your basic 3 millimeter. And this is the kind that comes in the plastic can. For some reason, mine was out of the can. But these are the kind that come in a plastic can from the major sewing and craft stores. Okay, so it's about, I don't know, $3 a can or so. And I mean, yes, they're technically plastic, but they actually look really surprisingly nice on your various projects. And they work really well with a serger foot. Now, with the advent of Amazon, Temu, etc., I think I actually bought this big thing of pearls off of Temu, which I have to admit was my first time using Temu. Again, the big thing, these are, I think, 5 millimeter. So you can see, okay, here's the difference in size. So 3 millimeters, say 5 millimeter, may be pushing it. But one thing to know about this particular foot is that it is adjustable in front. So I find that I can actually insert this through. So we'll try it out on the serger. But once I had to unscrew or loosen this up, and so I could slide this over and then retighten it in order to accommodate the 5 millimeter pearls. And if I put my finger here against the foot, I can still pull this through. So I would say the 5 millimeter should be safe. So 3 to 5 millimeter, you can go down smaller than 3, obviously, but that's, a workable size for your beading foot. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and let's look at how these actually go onto your machine. So I'm going to start with the 5000 just because it's behind here, and I won't be serging necessarily with it because it's easier for you to see what I'm doing on my 7000. But I'm going to show you how the foot works on the 5000. Everything else should be exactly the same. But the way the foot goes on, it's a little bit different. So I want to make sure that you can use it comfortably and easily. Okay, so let's go over here to our little Admire Air 5000. So the actual foot itself goes on. I raise my presser foot lever, push on there. There's a little tab in back here that releases the foot. And then you can see here's the little attachment point here. And so as far as how it actually goes on, it's just going to snap. Feel free to laugh at me. I've always found it awkward to put serger feet on. And it's not the serger, it's me. So I always am more than happy to let people laugh at my expense. There we go. Snaps right on. Even for me, it snaps right on. So it just goes on just like your regular serger foot. So again, remember that the beading foot is this one that has the down and back. Let's see if I can swoop in and refocus here. So remember, your beading foot has that channel, this kind of flange that sticks out and back, and that allows the beads to flow through the machine as you're stitching. Now you may have noticed that I have my little Admire Air 5000. I have this threaded with the needle in left position. This is a 4-thread serger, so it has 2 needle positions. I have my serger threaded with the needle in the left-hand position because this will allow, again, room for the beads. So this opening here, you can see how that's off to the right of my needle. So you want your needle in left position. Now, when you're actually putting them on, you will want to go ahead and pull back the stitch finger. So this is putting it into rolled hem position. So here's the little lever, and when I pull this, the stitch finger is going to pull back out of position. So you do want to use that so that you get the narrowest possible edge, even though you have your needle in the left-hand position. So, okay. So what really is kind of funky, I'm going to pull back my camera and refocus here. There we go. What's kind of funky about the way this goes on is this attachment here. And this is why I wanted to take the time to show you, because I will readily confess that when I first went to use this, I was a little perplexed as to how to actually put this all together. So if you open up, so see how the lid just pivots out of pivots out of the way. So when you open this up, so inside here, right here, is a screw. And to the side of your little 5000, I just love this serger to pieces. It's such a good little serger. But there's a slot right here. So that slot right there, see if I can get it a little better focus for you. Maybe, maybe not. There we go. That's a little better. All right. So this slot right here, the beading foot actually, this attachment actually goes in through that hole, but the screw has to be backed off to allow this to slide in. So I was like figuring out like, okay, I think it goes here, but I can't get it in there. And that was because I didn't have that screw backed off far enough. So let me see which, there we go. I found a really short screwdriver. I think this is IKEA, so I could fit it in front of the camera. So you need to make sure you back off that screw enough that you can actually slide. I'm actually going to open up the whole case. Slide this into place. Okay, did you see this, how it slides in like that? All right. So it slides in just like that. Now on this particular serger, they actually want you to lower. So I use the beading foot with the cutting blade up, but on this particular serger, it wants the cutting blade down, because see if let's get refocused here. This attachment, let's see if we can get in really close here. This attachment, see how it has this channel here in front? This is what's going to guide those beads into the foot. Now remember that the foot for the other serger, my 5000, it actually has the ability to, it has a channel on the foot itself. This one doesn't. It's a little short foot. So this attachment, again, it slides on and it covers up the cutting blade area and some of the feet. Okay, so again, this is very different than the other serger, the other beading foot. So once it's in place there, I'm going to want to go ahead and make sure it's there. And I do need to snug up this screw a little bit. So can you see why this might be, even if you've used a beading foot before, it might be just a little different for you. So I wanted to make sure to go through that so that you knew how to use this particular beading foot, because it's really a great beading foot. It works really well, but it's just a little bit different to put it on. Okay, so we're going to pretend that we're actually going to bead. So again, I talked about a little bit about checking the size of your beads. Now I know 3mm will work just fine. So I'm going to grab the strand of 5mm. And I have to say that it's kind of okay in that channel. It's okay. And so I can actually, luckily these are stiff enough, these beads are stiff enough that I can actually, as you saw, just basically flow them right into my foot pretty easily. I didn't even have to grab a pair of tweezers. But I can tell by the way these are sitting on top of that channel. And once I put my foot down, I can't move this. Okay, there's no flow here. So this is too big. These are too big for this foot, as I suspected. Okay, so let's go ahead and test a 3mm strand. Now see, these want to curl the other way, so no, it came out the back, so I can go ahead and grab it once it comes back. See, now these flow through that channel just fine. I'm going to set this down. And I like to, when I get started, make sure my foot's actually down and all that, which it is. Okay. So I'm holding the beads with my finger back here just to hold them, keep them from slipping around here. And I always, when I go to get started, always take a few stitches by hand just to hold the beads in place before I put my fabric in or anything like that. Okay, so I take a few stitches by hand just to, make sure it's started, make sure that the needle is actually missing the beads, that it's not hitting them. I lied. Let's go ahead and just put some on the edge of this silk dupioni here. But once you've done a few hand stitches to make sure that everything is in place, then you're okay, you're good to go in terms of going ahead and attaching them into your fabric. So see, when I get going, the serger, once it's attached the beads to the fabric, it's just going to get going. And pull it through. Now, this was just a sample. I just kind of got started and wasn't really paying attention, so it's not a perfect attachment here, but kind of gives you the idea of how to get it started. But we're going to focus on actually the other machine. I'm just going to cut this here. Now, if you're doing multiple strands of beads or multiple rows, just keep the beads in the serger, and so you can get started every time, and you'll cut those tails off later. And I'll show you how we're going to deal with that when we do a fascinator. Okay, so that's the Admire Air 5000. Let's go ahead and switch over to, we're going to switch over to the, oh, and I didn't raise my thread guide either. So luckily nothing bad happened. But so let's go ahead and come back to our Admire Air 7000 and look at how that foot works and how to get it started. Okay, so let's just go ahead and switch. Now, hopefully try to get a good angle on this for you so that you could really see what was going on. So I'm just going to open this up a little bit. Just make sure everything looks. Now on this foot, I'm going to raise my foot. And again, I'm going to drop the other one out of the way. So for this foot, I don't have to disengage the cutting blade, which really makes me happy because I prefer to have the cutting blade on there. And the only thing I don't like about the channel on the other foot is that you may have noticed that let's see, do I have this on the right spot? There we go. There we go. The channel was kind of keeping me from being able to put the fabric further over. It was a little harder to catch the fabric for doing that beaded edge. So that's something you have to work with. And it looks like I do have a little bit of adjustment capability on where to move that guide. Let me go back to that. Sorry, I just want to. You do have the ability to move this over a little bit. And I think I would choose to do that just to make sure that I was having trouble toward the beginning and the end of actually catching the fabric properly. So I would probably go ahead and loosen that just a titch and maybe move that over just a little bit to make it a little bit easier to catch the edge of my fabric. So you can adjust that on the 5,000. I just wanted to swing back and address that. Okay, so there are ways to adjust this guide. If you're finding that you're not quite catching the fabric with that needle, just move this over a little bit. It'll push this. There's wiggle room here where it can push that out of the way. So if you need to slide those beads over just a little bit to give you better contact with the needle, do it. Okay, let's go back to the 7,000. Okay, so here's our foot. So again, here's the front guide, the front opening. We have an opening here. We have an opening back there. Okay, so I really want to try these 5mm pearls because they're bigger than what I normally would use. And I can actually just close my door. Now I do have it already set, it says R. So I'm already set in R position. Oh, okay. Now this guide, remember in front, it's adjustable. Okay, so originally this was set up for 3mm. I couldn't even get the beads in here. So I thought, oh, well, I bet if I move that over and adjust it, then I can use the larger bead, and it does seem to work. But let's just test. So again, anytime you're doing something on the serger, I don't care what it is, anytime you're doing something on a serger, I want you to always, always, always cut yourself test pieces, test strips. You know, you need to test to make sure that your materials are going to work together. So here, oops, it would help if I picked the foot up, wouldn't it? There we go. Why is this not going through? Okay, now if it wants to take a dive into your machine, this is what tweezers are for. Like this one's stiff enough that I was pretty sure I could just push it through and it will. Okay. So again, you always want to test your materials. I mean, check your manual too. Whoops. Check your manual too, because your manual will usually say like, okay, you know, this will work with, you know, beads of size, you know, X, Y, Z. So you want to check your serger manual too. But I like to experiment, you know, that's my job, right? So I've set my foot down all the way and see how I have really good, what I think of as really good flow. So my foot's down, I have good flow. So it looks like these 5mm will be just fine on this serger. Yep. So there I've taken a few stitches. So I turned the hand wheel toward myself, and went ahead and, what do I want to say? Went ahead and caught those beads in place. Okay. So let's grab some scrap fabric. So I have this really fun hot pink tool that I thought might be kind of fun to run through the serger. So let's try that. So my beads are in place, so they're not going anywhere. And again, I really like being able to use my cutting blade with my beading foot. I like to have that security. Oops. Oops. What did I get stuck on? What's happening is I went to put my foot down and it didn't want to go down. Oops. Oh, there we go. So my beads had shifted a little bit to the left and it kept the foot from going down. So there you go. There's a troubleshooting tip right there. So you may have to just gently, you don't want to pull, but just gently guide the beads out of the way until the fabric gets going. Once the fabric gets going, the beads should feed themselves. And isn't it just kind of magical how now I'm using black thread, right? And so it's going to look ugly no matter what I do. But the point was to show you, to be able to see what I was doing. Whoops. There I got hung up just a little bit. Not sure why. So let's figure that out. Again, oh, we've got a bad bead. Okay, see this bead right here? Bad news. These are really cheap beads. So this is what's happened. It won't flow because this is getting hung up. I'm going to see if I can just shove that thing through. I'm really glad. I know this sounds strange, but I'm always glad when things like that happen when I'm demonstrating, so that it'll help you troubleshoot too. So just take your time when you're using the beading foot. I mean, Normally you can do this, super fast, like as fast as you want, totally. But that might happen where all of a sudden you get hung up. So by all means, be your usual happy, fast serger self, but be aware that you may need to go ahead and, you may have a little hang up like that. So pay attention to that flow. Flow is super important. So pay attention to the flow and how it's moving through your serger. So if I'd used obviously pink or white thread, this would be much more attractive. But I'm pretty excited about how you can add those pearl edges. So again, if you do a lot of bridal work, like actually this pearl, 5mm pearl is pretty soft. It adds great weight to a veil and it just really makes a beautiful edging. And these kinds of veils are very expensive. So you can do pretty well with it. Now I have my machine set for a wide 3-thread overlock. If I set it for rolled hem, the challenge with using the rolled hem is that I would want to put the thread, even though I'm using the left needle, I'd want to put the thread through the right guide. I'm going to try it just to see. It's all about experimentation, right? So I'm going to just see real quick. Let's go down to, actually I'll just select 3-thread narrow edge. No, actually I do want 3-thread. Let's see the 3-thread rolled edge. Now the reason why I'm using the wide 3-thread overlock is because I also want the stitch spacing to be longer. So if you set it for a rolled hem, you'd want to make sure to lengthen the stitch length. So I need to do that because otherwise it's making too many passes between each bead. You think, well, why would you do that? Well, I don't want it to make short stitches. I just wanted to tighten up the tension and see if I like the way it looks. Because again, anytime you're doing anything on the serger, the trick is you must test. You must test everything. It just, there's always little ways to adjust things to your personal preferences. Oops. Oh, I forgot to put my thread stand up. I'm like, why isn't the thread flowing better? That's the problem being on camera. You're trying not to block the view here. Whoops. And I'm on the wrong camera. There we go. So this is with the rolled hem setting. I'm just checking my needle thread. And so we can take a look and see, does it look any different? Not really. I'm just going to pull it out just a little bit. And see, I can always leave this tail here because I can cut that off later. Okay, so let's go to this close-up. So it did make a little bit nicer edge on it. Maybe. I mean, here's the first sample. This is set for the wide 3-thread. Here's the second sample set for a rolled hem, but still using that left needle. So I don't know. Maybe it looks a tiny bit nicer because the loop retention is tighter, but there's not a huge difference here. So in case you were wondering, not a big difference really between the two. So I think I like it with the loopers, the loop retention tightened a little bit. I think I do like it a little bit better. So there you go. All right. Now I do have some questions that have come up. So let me take a pause and take a moment to answer that. Okay, so the first question I actually have already answered, and sorry, that's a habit I have of, I'm mentally, channeling all of your thoughts and questions. And so, yeah, so I'm actually working with my serger. It's good to repeat these things. Working with my serger set up for a wide 3-thread overlock, wide 3-thread overlock. But I've also just experimented with setting it up for a rolled hem, but lengthening the stitch length, and I'm using the left needle instead of the right needle. Okay, so you can play around with things, but basically you want to set up for a wide 3-thread overlock. All right, now I don't see why you couldn't go ahead and use a 2-thread for this, but the main thing is you can use 2-thread stitches as well, but you want to make sure that you're using the left needle, or else you're going to hit the beads and you'll break your needle, right? So I know you had already figured that out. So, all right, other question. Did I set the stitch length for the size of the bead? I didn't really. Well, okay, I did and I didn't. So the first example, when I just set for a plain old 3-thread overlock, I didn't change the stitch length at all. Usually it's just fine, and it was. It had no problems at all. But when I set it for the rolled hem, I cranked the stitch length up to 3.0. So, and that seemed to work pretty well. I could probably go up even higher if I want to like a 4. But again, this is why we do samples. But it's really kind of magical, that rounded bead, even if the stitch is a little short, it just kind of slides off the bead and lands in the valleys. So that's the great thing about the beading foot, is it really is much more forgiving than you would think. As long as you're not hitting the beads with the needle, and as long as the beads are flowing through the machine, flowing through that foot smoothly, it's really quite forgiving. So keep the questions coming if you have them. And I'm perfectly happy just rolling along, entertaining you all. So I promised I would show you a couple of things. So one of them is I showed you just how to, my really beautifully ugly samples here, how you could put, for example, the edge on a piece of tulle that could be used in obviously a fascinator or a veil or some other kind of trim. This is really great for if you do children's apparel. So doing really, really fancy edges on little girls' dresses and things, it can look really fabulous. Or even, imagine a tutu with the beads on the edges, especially if you had ones that were a little shinier, sparklier. So you can do a lot of fun stuff with it. Or just the edge around a pillow, add them to the edge of a pillow. So I want to show you a couple of different techniques for serging. Number one, serging along the edge, along a fold. So you can just have, like in the example of the bustier, just to do trim, embellishment. And then I'm going to show you how to go on the edge of something like in a full circle, because people always are kind of not sure how to do a full circle. So if it's like something like my fascinator, you've got to turn the corner. So it actually has a point to it here. There it is. It's offset from my widow's peak here, but there's actually a point. So I'll show you how to pivot around that. So I have another question. The question was what are the tension settings for the needles and loopers? So I'm using standard tension settings for both these machines. So when I say standard, it's what the machine is set for that stitch. All right, so I cannot tell you, well, I can tell you like for the 5,000, I can tell you everything is set for 3. And 3 is the default tension settings. On this particular serger, on my 7,000, it's computerized, it's automated. So I can look in here and see what the tension settings are. So right now, like the 3-thread rolled edge, it says it's 2.0 for the needle, it's 1.2 for the upper looper, and it's 5.8 for the lower looper. But with any serger, the good news is that I'm basically using standard tensions. And that's it. With most sergers, I encourage you to, if you're not sure, look in your manual. So again, I'm using basically the original settings. You can tweak them, but different models of sergers will sometimes have a different setting for what's normal. So it's really hard for me to tell you that, okay, every serger will be set up like this. Well, they're not. So it doesn't always work that way. So check your needle, check your manual for what the settings are. But what I can tell you is that I've been working with just the standard settings for either a wide 3-thread overlock or the 3-thread rolled edge. But with the rolled hem, again, I'm actually using the left needle, but go ahead and run the needle thread through the correct needle, guide. That would be the guide for the right foot, but put it through the left needle instead. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So yeah, keep the questions coming. Those are always great. But I want to show you, again, how to add beaded trim along the edge, along the fold of fabric. So let's go back to the machine here. So my beads are already loaded up here. Now I'm going to go back from a rolled edge. I'm actually going to set it for 3-thread wide flat lock, actually. Let's try it like that, because I think I usually like the flat lock better because it's designed to open up. So a flat lock stitch, if you've never seen a flat lock stitch, when you stitch a flat lock, you then pull the seam open and it lays flat. Basically, the edges of the fabric underneath the stitching overlap a little bit. And it looks like serger stitching on the back, and it looks like ladder stitching on the front. I just don't have a sample right here. But if you want to put beads along the edge of something, the key is I don't want to cut. I'm going to serge along the edge, but not hit it with my cutting blade. So what I want to do is make sure that, see how I kind of have the edge, the fold of my fabric is lined up with the edge of my machine. And I can move if I want to. In fact, I may just do this. I may move my cutting blade. My cutting blade's already as far to the right as it will go. So move your cutting blade away from your needle, move it to the right. That will help. Could you disengage it? You can. I usually leave it in place just because it's a good visual to remind me not to go too far. Because the trick with, if you lower the cutting blade, what'll often happen is people will get really inconsistent stitches. So their stitches will be real wide here or real narrow here because they don't realize that they're letting the fabric go back and forth. The cutting blade, well, needless to say, if you swerve too far, it's going to cut the fabric. So in this case, it's not the end of the world if it does clip it. Sorry, I threw off my camera for a second. If it does clip it, it's not the end of the world, in the sense that you probably won't see it underneath the beads. So I hope that's reassuring. I need to move my head into a different position. Oh, it's my fascinator. I think that's throwing off the camera. Sorry, let me take that off. There we go. I also just need to make sure that, sorry, I'm going to get back out of it. My machine's at an angle, so I needed to see what I was doing. There we go. So I'm going a little slow because, again, it's, in order to give you a good view, it's a little bit of an awkward angle. So there, I serged along the fold. Let's take this to the close-up here. And then because this is a flat lock, I can just gently pull. Let's go to this one. I'm just going to gently pull this. And so here's my stitches. This is actually the needle stitches are underneath here. So it's kind of an upside down flat lock. So there's my needle stitches looking like a ladder. And then the looper stitches are holding this in place. So that's how you can use the beading foot to bead along just anywhere on your fabric. So I do like to use the flat lock for this, but you can technically use the overlock as well. But personally, as a big beading foot fan, I like to set for a wide 3-thread flat lock. So again, the back side of your fabric will look like a ladder stitch. And then the front, of course, you'll just see your beautiful, beautiful embellishment. So there, now you can see a little better the threads in between, the looper threads between the beads. Now on this green fabric, the black thread isn't quite as ugly. But again, I just folded my fabric, and just applied the beads right along the fold using my flat lock stitch. And then when I was done, I just gently pull, and I'm pulling, away from center here. So I just very gently pull this flat. And so that really, if you practice this technique, that really opens up the ability to use the beading foot in really exciting ways. that you can put it down the middle of a piece of fabric and not be stuck. Now, if you were putting this like on my bustier, I did have to be very careful that I had to cut the beads out of the seam allowance where my seam allowance is going to cross. So you do have to think about things like that. So if you're going to have a seam allowance cross it, make sure you cut those beads out of there. All right, so I want to finish up by showing you how to go around a fascinator. So if you don't know what a fascinator base is, they're kind of a teardrop looking shape, because they're made to go, somewhere on your head. And there's actually a British person who sells these on Etsy and you can buy them by the dozen even. And they're not very expensive. And they're just really great for using as a fascinator base. But I find that if I put a pearl edge around it, it really helps to hold everything in place. It gives me a nice edge. So then when I start using my hot glue gun to glue in other trims and things, it gives me something to kind of hold it all together. So that's kind of my secret sauce for doing fascinators. This one's actually, considering it's been shoved in a suitcase and boxes and things, it looks pretty good. The feathers have survived remarkably well. All right, so let's get to the machine here. So on your fascinator, you need to decide, and actually I can tell I've used this as a sample before because it's been cut a little bit. No one will never see that when all is said and done. But if you're not feeling real comfortable about serging around your fascinator base, just go ahead and take the beads out and just do a round without beads, especially if you have an extra one to practice on. And that can get you comfortable with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this one anyway. So on your fascinator, you need to decide when you're wearing it, which side is going to be toward the top of your head. That's usually where I start because that's where it's least likely to show. Okay, so when we come around, the join may not be, hopefully it'll be really perfect, but it may not be totally perfect. So if you put that like on the center where it's going to be the top of your head, it's not going to be as obvious as say if you started around where it's going to be the side of your head. Okay, now this is kind of it's a, what I would say, convex shape. We're going to make it concave, just pushed on it to flatten it out. And I'm going to just slide it on in here. I need to reset for a 3-thread. Do that 3-thread. I'm just going to do a 3-thread overlock. Actually, I did a narrow edge. There we go. Okay. All right. Now, again, normally you'd be using matching thread. And it never hurts to just do a few stitches. Make sure that it's fastened on there. And see, I have my needle down. And serging around the edge of something and serging on corners is always a bit challenging for a lot of serger users. So just take your time. And sometimes it is, oh, I'm not quite in my channel. There we go. I was like, why isn't it flowing? Because it wasn't quite in the channel. So I'm going to try to keep my head out of the way, but it's a little challenging. But we're just going to go around the edge. Don't expect this to be beautiful because, like I said, I'm serging at a really weird, I'm like sideways to my machine, so cut me some slack. So we're just going to go around, doo-doo. I have to admit, I've never done one of these with these bigger beads, but it's kind of fun. And I'm actually pushing the edge of this a little further over than I normally would. I would normally have my fascinator inbound or toward the needles a little bit more, so it was more on the edge. But so again, practice. Order an extra base or two, or practice with felt until you get the hang of it. So what I'm watching for now is I'm watching for that point. So I know I have a point here and I'm going to stick my head in the way again. Okay, so I'm getting close to the point of my fascinator. One. I'm going to turn my hand wheel by hand. You can do that. Okay, I'm going to leave my needle down. So my needle's down, and I'm going to just pivot around here. I'm also going to, back here at the beginning, I'm going to cut off the loose bead while I'm stopped. There we go. Okay, so I'm pivoting with my needle down. I've pivoted down. We'll put that back down. Take a stitch or two and just make sure that I'm, I turn the corner. It's not a super sharp corner, which is nice. Here's an unstitched one. So it's kind of a dull corner anyway. So it's pretty easy to pivot around it. But even if it was sharp, it would go around pretty well. So here, okay, here's where I have to look. So see, here's that last bead. This is where it gets a little trickier. Here's the last bead. I'm going to look at where the beads are going into the serger and see how it's kind of lined up with this bead here. So I'm actually going to clip. It's a good thing I didn't go any farther. I'm going to clip right here. So that, now this may lift up my serger a little bit. That's okay. I could also potentially, I've never done this before, but I think I'm going to try it. See if I can just take that off the front. Oh, look at that. How handy is that? Okay, so I just took that off the front. This makes it even easier. So when I come around now, watch your fingers. My foot is well away from my pedals. I'm also going to double check. So see how my beads are kind of overlapping? I may cut that one more. Or I may just try to cram them in there. No, I think I need to cut one more bead out of there. Oops, I need some smaller scissors first. Where's my snips? There's my snips. Let's reach in there and boop. Get it out of there. Okay. So again, the goal is to get those beads to just line right up. But take a few stitches and stop if you have to. And actually, I'm going to be a good girl and use something besides my fingers. So we do want to make sure these beads stay in the channel. And this is where having the cutting blade down would help. But if I need to, I can always turn the hand wheel by hand as well. So this is the trickiest part. Actually, I think I will just go ahead and disengage that sucker. Make it easy for myself. But there's a lot of ways to you want to watch your fingers. So I'm trying not to do that. But if you need to, use your hand wheel, especially get to this part. So there's that last bead. Now we're about to overlap with the first bead. So a few stitches here until I can get that looper. Don't ever want anyone to get in the habit of putting their hands in a serger. Keep your foot well away from the foot pedal. But I want to get these beads in here so I can get the looper thread. There we go. So I caught that in the looper thread. And then I can go ahead and take a few more stitches. But see how I let my fascinator go too far over, and so it was kind of grabbing a little bit deeper than I wanted it to. But once I've gone ahead and caught the previous one, I can just lift my, so see right there. I would go ahead and I would probably go back in and redo that, just restitch that. That's kind of ugly. But this is the danger of not, when you do disengage that cutting blade, is that it's a lot easier to have an uneven stitch. So I'm just going to pull some of that out. But again, this is why you practice. And you're not normally going to be serging sideways to your machine like I'm doing. Leave it to the professionals. We make better mistakes, bigger mistakes faster. That's what I always like to say. Bigger mistakes faster. That's what makes us professionals. Let's just clean this up and we're going to just hit it one more time. And I do think it's easier, I have to say, with the smaller beads. They just move through the machine so much easier. So these 5 millimeters definitely only do if you're comfortable with it. So let me just lift my foot up a little, see if I can get this to slide under this foot. There we go. Come on, honey. Okay, come on. No, I think this is going to be a take the foot off and re-hit it. Of course, when you're doing this at home, it always comes out just fine. And see, look at what a beautiful pivot I have going on. So let's just take this foot off real quick. We still have a few minutes. Get this back in the channel. Because that's the whole key here, is getting it all into the channel. Let's lift up that wire. Oops. Let's try that one more time. You're probably wondering right now, I am thinking, you know what, I probably would just go ahead and take the beads off and do it again. But I wanted to see if I could actually pull it off to redo it without having to do that. But honestly, if this really happened to me, I would probably just take the beads off and give it another shot. I'd probably get it right the second time. So I don't know if I can get the foot back on with all the beads in place. I'm just going to give it a shot here. No, I'm not even going to try it. So as you can see, the trickiest part is just right there at the end. It's easy to pivot, but you do want to take some extra care just to, it would have been fine, but I swerved, partly because I couldn't see what I was doing. I swerved too far inbound, too far into the fascinator. And this is why, as I said, I generally keep my cutting blade engaged. It just tends to keep me more on the consistent. But if it had gone ahead and stayed, if I hadn't moved it too far to the right, it would have gone ahead and caught this, and see how it would have lined up just fine. So don't be discouraged by my little goof right there. It'll be fine. And it really is a great way to finish off the edge. And again, don't even worry about things like corners, because you can just simply put your needle down and just pivot and keep going. So not a problem, but it just makes such a beautiful edge. And it just gives you something to work with. And just practice, practice, practice. And I know that you will get it absolutely perfectly right the first time. So I hope you've enjoyed learning how to bead with your serger. I just really encourage you to try out this great foot, and there's so much you can do with it. And just remember to test to make sure that your beads can flow through the foot. So like I said, I was kind of wishing now that I'd stuck with the 3 millimeter beads, but the 5 were fun, and I'm going to play around with it and learn some new tricks for working with the larger stuff. But I'm Katrina Walker, and this has been PFAFF Innovation Hour and Beading with your serger. I hope you've learned a lot, and thank you for joining me in my studio. And happy serging.